In this video, I'm going to go through all 20 effects of alcohol that I could possibly find on the internet through sites like ChatGPT, sites, articles, you possibly name it. And while there are probably a lot more out there, I thought I'd comprise it into a 20 single list because none of the other ones seemed really specific enough and were far too generic for me to possibly consider. But yeah, first, as always, subscribe and stick around to the end to implement these tips and tricks into your life. Now, the first effect that ethanol has on the body is that it is a diuretic, and this means that it inhibits the production of ADH. Now, ADH is the hormone that basically regulates your water levels by allowing water to either pass through kidney tubules into the bladder and those tubes and to then be excreted by the body, or not, or it's staying in the bloodstream. And what ethanol does is it inhibits ADH, and this means that the kidney tubules can't sort of constrict and keep water in the body, and it just all kind of flows out of the bloodstream, osmosis out of the bloodstream, goes into the bladder, and then it's all excreted. And that is why people often go to the loo, etc. quite a lot when they're going to nights out, etc., despite the fact they're not actually drinking so much water. And this can lead to a lot of dehydration because you often don't notice the fact that you're actually thirsty simply because you are still drinking. It's just not actually the right thing that you're supposed to be drinking, and often you end up then waking up with a banging headache. But that's a separate effect that I'm going to go over in a little bit. And the second effect that alcohol has is that it stops frontal lobe development. And frontal lobe is the sort of part of your brain that controls memory and consciousness. And when alcohol is absorbed by the gut, goes into the bloodstream, it can easily pass through the blood-brain barrier. And this means that it does things to your brain, causes the sort of hallucinations, the drunken confidence, etc. that you may experience on nights out. But what it also does is it probably does a few chemical reactions that are very, very bad for your brain, which stops the actual development and hinders your ability to remember things. And hence why if you're like way too drunk, which not many people really ever end up experiencing, they just simply cannot remember what happened when they were actually drinking because their brain was simply not able to actually take it in because it was just so screwed with all the ethanol molecules inside of it. And the third effect that alcohol has on the body is that it causes hallucinations and muscle motor issues. Now, I touched on this in the last one, but essentially, as I said before, it passes very easily through the blood-brain barrier, and this means that it causes hallucinations because it just does stuff to your brain that your brain is probably better off without. And because your brain ends up controlling the muscles, etc., inside of your body, you end up sort of not really being able to move and act as you normally would if you weren't drinking. So yeah, that just causes a few motor issues. And the fourth effect that alcohol has on the body is liver cirrhosis. Now, the liver is where ethanol is metabolized, and because the metabolism of ethanol produces a group 1 carcinogen known as acetaldehyde, excessive metabolism of ethanol essentially just toxifies the liver completely and stops it working whatsoever. You end up developing a load of like fatty stuff that's just not good for you at all. If you've ever seen like a black liver or like a yellow liver from the liver cirrhosis, it's absolutely disgusting. And that's essentially what kind of happens to your liver if you were excessively metabolizing this stuff so often. And the fifth effect that alcohol has on the body is pancreatic cancers. Now, while I previously said that a lot of ethanol is metabolized in the liver, a lot of it actually ends up going into the pancreas. It doesn't end up getting metabolized in there. That role is unique to the liver, but it does end up having a few effects in there that just isn't good whatsoever, as well as acetaldehyde that ends up circulating around the bloodstream. It ends up having an acute effect on the pancreas specifically, which, yeah, this can cause pancreatic cancers because, as I said before, acetaldehyde is a group 1 carcinogen, which does things to your cells, causes cell mutations, and that ends up meaning that your cells multiply. The tumours can either be malignant or benign, and yeah, cancer is just a really horrible disease that no one really deserves to have. And the sixth effect that alcohol has on the body is throat and mouth cancers. And this is essentially because, as I said before, when you're drinking so much ethanol, which is a carcinogen, it just ends up having a bad effect on the sort of cells inside of your mouth, your throat, and then maybe even the sort of acetaldehyde that's circulating behind areas like your mouth, throat, tongue, etc. can cause DNA and cell mutations in those specific areas. But with all the other stuff that is commonly used in alcoholic drinks, some like really low dosages of like the poisons like propanol, methylbutanol, all that sort of stuff that are still technically alcohols but just not really common whatsoever inside of drinks, that stuff all just does stuff to your mouth, etc., that it's better off without. And the 7th effect that alcohol has on the body is the hangover. A lot of people that are way older than me would have probably experienced this quite a few times, and its reasons are, as I said before, the acetaldehyde just drains your brain fluid completely, all the water that was in your brain. Because I also mentioned earlier about ethanol being a diuretic, these two molecules, their effects on the brain combining, just drains your brain of essential fluids. And it means when you wake up from that great night out, you end up waking up feeling absolutely awful with a banging headache, which I'm sure many people can sort of relate to. And often I've heard a few stories of people countering this by just drinking a lot of water throughout the duration of their night out. And the 8th effect that ethanol has on the body is vomiting and nausea and diarrhea, which is kind of an obvious one. Ethanol is a poison, along with a lot of other stuff inside alcoholic drinks, and so it's kind of like that it's probably going to make you very, very ill. So, yeah. And the 9th effect that alcohol has on the body is that it can actually poison you in one sitting. If you have way too much alcohol in one sitting, you will simply die. That's not a joke. That's not some silly, funny thing. You will die, and that is serious. And that just shows you how bad ethanol is. And while I know there are going to be people in the comments that are saying things like, oh, water's really bad if you drink like 2 gallons. No one's going to drink 2 gallons of water. But it is very feasible, very possible to die of drinking too many alcoholic drinks. And there have been way more cases than water poisoning. And the 10th effect that alcohol has on the body is that it irritates the gut lining. Now, as I said before, when ethanol is digested, it goes through stomach, gut, small intestine, large intestine. When it's absorbed, it has to pass through like a semi-permeable membrane. And when it does this, it irritates said semi-permeable membrane by probably doing a few sort of chemical things, which I'm not quite able to understand yet. But it does it, and it's bad for you. And it's just, yeah, it means that you end up sort of having that stomach rumbling. I mean, people who probably don't drink very often may possibly experience this because their gut just isn't really used to it all that often, and they probably will feel quite acute symptoms in the gut after having like an alcoholic drink or two. But that's just what I personally think. I may be wrong, but yeah, tell me in the comments if you sort of agree or can relate to that in any way. And the 11th effect that alcohol has on the body is addictiveness and reliance. Now, while ethanol isn't technically an additive, it's not addictive, it doesn't do anything to the brain, nothing to do with the sort of like nicotine and it stimulates the brain cells or anything like that. It's more just the fact that if people are struggling in life, they can turn to these things like alcohol to sort of give themselves a bit more of a good time than what they may currently be experiencing. And if these bad issues in their life end up continuing, they can develop the reliance towards alcohol to just give themselves a bit of a break in life. But obviously that causes reliance and addiction. It's the opposite of self-mastery. And I do hope that anyone that is currently experiencing a problem with that can get over it in the future. And I may do videos on that. And the 12th effect that alcohol has on the body is that it produces group 1 carcinogens, which are classified as basically they are known to cause cancer in humans. And that's why they can put like labels and stuff on alcoholic drinks that like this will cause cancer if you drink too much of it, etc, etc, etc. It's quite self-explanatory. I've mentioned it in a few of the steps before, but it deserves a name of its own. It deserves a sort of effect of its own, that it literally produces carcinogens and causes a lot of cancer. And the 13th effect that alcohol has on the body is problematic and quick weight gain. And I recently saw a short, and this is all a bit of a side tangent, that said that ethanol, etc., is because alcohol actually contributes to your calorific sort of calorie tracking, etc. You may not know this, but alcohol as a food group contains 7 calories per gram, which is more than carbs and proteins, but still less than fats, which is 9 calories per gram. And I saw something that said that as long as you're not going over your sort of daily maintenance calories, the calories in, calories out, etc., you're not going to gain any weight from drinking alcohol. But the problem is that alcohol slows your metabolism down, so you're burning less calories on a per hourly basis when you're not exercising, because your reactions happen at a slow rate inside all the different cells inside of your body. And this means that the more that you drink ethanol, the slower your metabolism gets, the more likely you are to go over your daily maintenance calories. And this means that you end up getting a lot of weight gain incredibly quickly because, I mean, I guess this is kind of two separate steps. It causes slow metabolism and therefore weight gain, but I put it into one because I saw that short recently and it kind of annoyed me just because it didn't really make sense scientifically. And yeah, I thought I'd speak about it here. And the 14th effect that alcohol has on the body is muscle atrophy and weakness. And this is a bit self-explanatory. As I said before, with the sort of motor issues, with the brain not being able to sort of control your limbs effectively, in the long term, when this happens repeatedly, you end up sort of losing control of your limbs and you end up not being able to utilize them as effectively as a human potentially should. And I feel like that's something that you should probably know about. And the 15th effect that alcohol has on the body is malnutrition and malabsorption. And that is because alcohol inhibits nutrients from being absorbed inside of the body throughout your daily meals, your 3 meals a day, your breakfast, lunch, dinner, etc., snacks, whatever you name it. It stops nutrients being absorbed, and this means that it can't be used and utilized in the reactions that those nutrients are absolutely essential for. And this will just harm your body in a plethora of different ways and just make it more difficult for you to sort of achieve your macronutrient and micronutrient goals. And the 16th effect that alcohol has on the body is erectile dysfunction, simply because, and this is essentially step 17, ethanol decreases your testosterone levels because it just does. I mean, I will probably do a video on this in the future, but I just know that it does. It does because you see it in so many people, and yeah, it just, a few chemical reactions happen. It probably inhibits a reaction that produces cholesterol, or inhibits a reaction that is needed to produce testosterone, or anything else in that sort of chemical process. It inhibits something, and because your body is such a fragile ecosystem, it just ends up having a bad impact and your testosterone decreases, and that causes erectile dysfunction. That was steps both 16 and 17, not steps, but, you know, effects on the body. And effect 18 on the body is respiratory depression, and this is essentially where your breathing becomes slurred, slower, and heavier when you're on a lot of alcohol. You may have sort of noticed in people that you're around, parents, friends, people like that you go out with or whatever, that their sort of breathing gets slower, heavier, like they sort of feel almost continually tired. And that's because they're going through respiratory depression, because that's just something that ethanol does to the body when you consider the long term. And I think the last 5 steps have essentially been long term effects. All the other sort of 15, 14 were all pretty much short term, immediate. But this is when you sort of consume ethanol, alcoholic drinks, for an extended period of time. And yeah, that's what's in store for you if you sort of abuse these poisons and toxins for too long. And effect on the body 19 is profuse sweating. I mean, I don't know if this is actually sort of true. I don't really have any other people's personal experiences to talk from, but apparently you just sweat a lot when you end up drinking alcohol. That may be wrong, but it's something that I found on the internet. Who knows? And the 20th effect that alcohol has on the body is increased heart rate. It just increases your sort of blood pressure, increases the amount of beats per minute that your heart actually sort of contracts, because your heart is a muscle. It will contract, and this will pump the blood around your body, and it increases the amount of time that happens per minute. It will exhaust the heart muscle, and this leaves you more susceptible to things like heart attacks, strokes, all that nasty stuff. So with that, I hope you found value out this video, and I hope you now sort of understand the adverse effects that alcohol can have on the body. And I also recommend subscribing, because I love this community of young tribal people who are willing to improve themselves so much more than they already have. And good luck.